My name's Graham Burkhead. I'm on the board of the NZIOB, and welcome to this Building Legends session. Come on in, mate. Sign your life away just at the front. This is number 5 in our Building Legends sessions, but I thought I'd start with a wee story. So when I started in construction, let's say a lot of years ago, there's a few people around here I know well and they're snickering at that. So let's say 40 years ago, I'm on my first construction site and the wily old foreman says something like, "Shit, construction's getting complicated. We used to build the town hall with 3 drawings. Look at this, I've got 100 drawings on this building." That was 40 years ago. What is that construction site you're on these days? That 100 drawings has turned into 1,000 drawings probably. If you had to print out all the drawings on one of your jobs, it would be huge. That's the complexity that's changed in our sort of lifetimes, if you like. And that's the game that you people are all faced with in your construction, and the journey that you're on to. So that's what the Building Legends stuff is about. All that training that we need to get on top of the complexity that we're faced with every day out there. But it's the same people that are coping with that complexity. It's still Unitech, Bachelor of Construction, Bachelor of QSing. A lot of our top site managers started life as an apprentice carpenter. You imagine the training for an apprentice carpenter who, there was a couple on stage at the NZIOB Awards there a month ago, started life as an apprentice carpenter on site, on winning the award for the over $50 million category as the top PM in that section. Imagine the training, on-the-job training that person has had to lead that project. So that's, I guess, what we're all faced with out there. When we've run these Building Legends sessions, so we've had one on construction planning, we've had one on extensions for time, we've had one on contracts 101, we've had one on how to run your business. But at the end of all of those sessions, we say, what's the next hot topic we should try and focus on? And just about always design management comes up. But no one's ever run anything on design management. You people that are design managers, you taught yourself. Our presenters have taught themselves. It's, so we've gone out to industry to find the best practitioners that we could find in this design management field. So the first guy we pulled together was a fella called Jamie Valance here. So Jamie, he was a design manager before there was a word for design management. So he's been on the case for that. Now he's an owner of NZ Strong, but very experienced in this field. And so we've had an eye on him for a long time to be part of presenting today. Very experienced in this field. Now, as a Kiwi boy, we don't like admitting that sometimes the Aussies do things a bit better than us. But in design management, I've found, because they do a lot of design and construct, their design management is a whole lot more organised than we are. So that's where we came across Dan from Icon. So he's brought up on the Aussie approach to design management, which I think has been a little bit more sophisticated than we've been. And some of those Aussie boys are teaching us a few things. Now, I'm saying that to you people, but outside this room, I wouldn't admit that the Aussies do anything any better than us. But Icon do a good job, and Dan is one of the leaders at Icon. But a lot of us, the design management is thrust on us because we've won a job at tender. The project manager has done an average job of coordination, and the architect's done an average job, and we've won a job at tender with a whole bunch of design management we have to do while we're trying to build the job. So that's what happens to a lot of us in the real world. So we found Jennifer in the front row here. So that's her role at NZ Strong. They've won a job, they're starting construction, and she's got to figure out all the gaps in the project ahead of time before the builders start building. So a lot of us are in that situation, so we're pleased to have Jennifer. So she'll be at the session in 2 weeks' time. So that's the session that she'll be taking. But first up, we need an architect. We found Shara. So she's from Ignite Architects, and passionate design manager, passionate architect, and we need to understand from an architect's point of view what's design management from their viewpoint. So a lot of people in this room are from a construction point of view. We need to understand, well, what's design management done when an architect leads it? So she's going to kick things off and set the stage about what design management is from an overview, and then dive down into some detail as well. So we really appreciate having Shara as part of all this. Now, you'll see our presenters, they didn't come from university, they didn't come from Unitech, they're practitioners out there with a real job. So they've given up a whole lot of time to try and put all of their knowledge together for us. So we really appreciate the time that's gone in. You might have to cut them a bit of slack because they ain't professional presenters, but they're very, very good at what they do. But they're not going to mind, and they'll prefer if you ask a few questions and we get a bit interactive. Because a few of them are shaking in their boots. The calibre of the people in this room, we've got some pretty bloody senior people that should be presenting, not sitting in the audience. So we want to hear from you as well. If you agree, if you don't agree, if you've got a different point of view, please interrupt. Say, what about this? We'll all get more out of it if it's a bit interactive. Anyway, that's enough from me. We really appreciate Shara kicking things off.
Awesome. Thanks,
Over to you.
Okay, fantastic. So I'm Shara. Can you hear me at the back, or do I need to talk a bit louder? Yep. Awesome. Fantastic. I work at Ignite Architects as an associate director there, and I've been there for coming up 8 years now. And the first project I worked on was actually this one. So this is Star Mountain Plaza. I did the emergency egress stairs on the side of that hotel there in the background. You just got to pretend that that cladding isn't there so you can really appreciate it. And look, Graham asked me to kick off by establishing my credibility. So I guess so you can take me seriously. So this is what I can offer to this conversation that we're having today. I'm a registered architect. At Ignite, I have worked on large format retail, commercial fit-outs, aged care, health care, high-end residential, social housing, master planning, front-end feasibility, mixed use, remediation and education. So a good range in terms of typologies. In a previous life, I was actually involved in presenting and delivering professional engineering skills to extremely talented, intelligent people, much like what we're doing here today. And that included leadership and also communication skills. I've been kicking around in this industry for about 20 years, and in my daily practice, I adopt a design management approach, particularly in the lead role that I typically hold on a project, which is lead consultant. So the reason I'm personally attracted to the idea of design management is that I see it as a tool that enables people to do their best work. And why else do we get out of bed in the morning, right? To see ourselves, to see each other succeed in the projects that we deliver. So I wear a few hats. I'm not a traditional, if that's what we can even call it yet, design manager, but that means I can give you a unique perspective and the designer bit that makes up the term design management. So that's enough about me for now, but I'd like to learn a bit more about this audience, and perhaps we can learn from each other as well. So I've got a few questions, but before I do, I just want to echo what Graham was saying just before. I encourage you to interact. I encourage you to ask questions and to be brave and to participate, because that's how we learn best. And it can feel daunting. There's quite a few of us. It's quite a big crowd. I understand it's perhaps slightly bigger than what we might typically expect for these events, but it's certainly going to be worthwhile. So I'm going to ask Dan and Jamie and Jennifer, if a question is out there and nobody's answering, just wait a little longer for an awkward silence to ensue before taking a punt in the event that we've got a super polite audience, okay? But obviously jump in if we need to. So the first question I've got here is, who works for a construction company? Can you put your hand up? Yeah, okay, good. Who actually builds things by driving machinery and operating tools? Anyone? Okay, all right. Who here has completed leadership training? Fantastic, that's a great outcome. That's good news for design management in New Zealand. Who here is a design manager? Oh, excellent. Okay, so I'm going to give up this presentation. You guys are next. That's a good crowd. What I like about this is that you're all evenly distributed throughout the room. Towards the end, we've got a group exercise, so that'll put us in good stead. Who here is an architect or an architectural designer? Okay, cool. That's not a bad spread either. Definitely a minority in the room. Okay. And that's why the title of this presentation was Common Ground, because this entire workshop is basically about how to manage designers, one could argue. So it's really important that we understand what designers are, etc., so that we can actually manage them successfully. So what I'd like to work with you through today is about the designer's perspective, to give you insight as to why we might be quite hard to manage. Some basic roles in a project team, some of the gems that we have at Ignite with respect to design management tools that we use, and then work through a group exercise together. With that in mind, is there anything else that you're not seeing here that you think would be really interesting to focus on in the first part of today? Anything else you'd like covered? Question one, silence. Okay, this is good. Right. Straight into it. No design gets left behind. I'm quoting Dan here because he is a genius. That is excellent. I love it. And for obvious reasons why, right? No design gets left behind. So you're all lucky enough to have him present at the next session. We'll have to hold out till then. I was asked to share with you the world of design management from an architect's perspective, i.e. design management pre-contract letting. But all design is pre-contract letting, isn't it? All design happens before you get to site, doesn't it? Am I right? Why are you laughing? What am I missing here? So is that surprising? Is that sort of unusual, that idea? What's been your experience?
100% design isn't quite 100%.
Yeah? A couple of things missing, maybe? Yep. Has anyone else experienced that? Sure. Yeah, okay. So I did a little quick Google search, and it turns out that design manager job adverts are largely from construction firms or developer/clients that are also potentially building as well. And I found that really intriguing, that when we hit the physical stage of a project, that's when we're advertising for somebody to manage the design. So who has worked with a design manager as a named role on the project team? And it doesn't have to be that you were the design manager, but who's worked with one? Okay. What was their background like? Who did they work for? Was it a construction firm? Do you remember? Yeah? Yeah. Construction firm? Yep. Was it yours in your case as well?
Yeah.
Was anyone working a project manager? Did anyone work with a project management firm that had a design manager?
Yeah.
Couple? Okay. What about a architect? Anyone? One? Fantastic. Okay, so we've got a good range. That's good, because as a design manager, you need to understand the full extent of a project. But why am I talking about this? I guess design management, as Graham alluded to, is a really hot topic at the moment. And we have all arrived here in quite an organic way. And it's really important we understand what our industry actually needs from us to be able to do our jobs well and to make sure we're clear on the value that design management can add. So, as I mentioned before, Dan's going to talk you through in a bit more detail about why no design should be left behind, but what I want to emphasize right now is how much I entirely agree with that comment, as would most, if not all, designers, okay? We hate delivering unresolved designs as much as contractors hate building them. I can assure you on that. So, a little bit about the core role of the designer. It's to advocate for the why through the what and the how. That's it in a sentence. So this means actually figuring out what the problem is that needs to be solved and what the project actually is. It means that the design team is actually geared up to cope with ambiguity and uncertainty. So most of you in the room are from a construction side, as you raised your hands before. Would I be right in saying uncertainty and ambiguity when executing a build contract is literally your worst nightmare? Is that fair? Yeah, okay. And yet the design team, we're focusing on this problem solving, on what the brief actually is. You know, it's extremely loose. What problem is the contractor trying to solve? That's right, yeah, how to actually build this thing. That's exactly right. So it seems that we're sort of in a different space and that could get a little awkward, right? But I think what I would like to suggest at this point is that we are all designers, because problem solving does take creativity. So builders need to think creatively to solve the problem of actually getting this thing built. Architects need to think creatively to define the problem itself. And why do I want to identify common ground between builders and designers? Because if we don't understand the design team, we're not going to be able to manage them successfully. So stepping into the designer's world just for a little longer. So it's typical for designers to deal with uncertainty. We're comfortable with ambiguity. We're used to working with a lack of information. Often we work with a lack of direction. Sometimes we don't even have a brief. So we sit there and reverse engineer it on behalf of the client to help them understand what it is that they actually want to achieve by the end of it. Sometimes we don't even know what the budget is for a project, and sometimes even the site is unknown. So we're busy designing something in space. And all of that is totally normal. It doesn't stress us out. And I'll touch on what stresses us out soon, another question that Graham raised. So if you think about the designer's part in a project timeline, this graph is totally common. You would have seen it a billion times, but I just thought it was a really useful way to describe the designer. So you'll see that, I'm going to use a pointer. We've got concept design there. So everyone, it seems like everyone will probably be somewhat familiar with these phases, but I'll talk you through very briefly what they are. So concept design here is to work with the client to figure out what it is they want. Preliminary design is about where the project can go and not go. I'm being very, very high level here because I think it's helpful. Develop design here is what it is, and then detailed design is how to put it together. So it's a sequential thing that we work through as a design team. And so what I find really interesting is the relationship that design influence has with design certainty. So design influence here is super high, and then as you work through the project, it gets really low. And for the contractor, that design certainty goes up, which is great, because you want to be certain about what it is you're building by the time you get to site. So the ideal is this. So we want to be super well resolved, 100% design, hit site, boom, everything goes really well. The reality is something like this. So this little triangle here is why everybody's here today, as far as I can tell, because you're all from the construction side. So we move ideally from high levels of influence to high levels of certainty, and that is a beautiful project progression. So that triangle is where design managers, I guess, are motivated, but it's also where we can help. So let's use design acceleration as an example of what a designer might have to face in terms of all of the stuff that happens before you get to site. So if you think about compressing any of these phases or putting one on top of the other, what you're asking the designer to do is provide design completeness when there's high levels of uncertainty. It's hard. right? It's probably what you're having to deal with when you're on site. And we're also asking the contractor to price, procure, and build off incompleted, uncoordinated drawings, potentially a light documentation set. It's hard work for the designer, it's hard work for the builder, and nobody has fun. And that's because we're not geared up that way. And my analogy that I was sort of thinking through in terms of construction, because I've done a little alteration at home, is asking the framing team, the plasterboard team, the stopping team, and the painting team to all work on the same wall at the same time to save time. It's not going to end well, and that's effectively the same when you start to mess with this program and move away from a traditional linear process. You've got to do things differently. So we can't figure out all phases at the same time, even though it might be expected from us, and quality tends to suffer. So as design managers, anything that we can do to enable those processes to occur in the right way, such that when we get to this dotted line, we've got the best chance to give the team on site a chance to build a completed set of from a completed set of drawings, is obviously the ideal. But the key message is, as designers rely on high levels of influence to do a good design, builders rely on high levels of certainty to do a good build, and that's where design managers can really assist. And a side note, just if you do find you're sort of here, you've got the set of documents and your documentation certainty is sort of sitting around there, get Jennifer on your team, because she has so many tools available that will definitely help you, and you're going to love her presentation in a fortnight's time, because she has lots of really good gems, so you'll need to take good notes. Okay, so just drilling in a little bit to talk more about the design team itself. They are interdependent. Okay, so there is no contract relationship between them. They rely totally on each other to achieve a good outcome. So what this means in practical terms is that the design team is only as strong as their weakest link, just like trades rely on each other, right? So, you're not going to be able to do a good job painting if your plasterboard, and your stopping hasn't been done well, and they can't do a good job if the framing isn't straight. So it's the same with design team. We need to rely on each other. So if you think about what you did at work today, was there someone who you didn't line manage and are not responsible for, and you've got no contractual relationship with whatsoever, but you needed information from them or needed something from them in order to do your job? Thinking back to what you did this morning, maybe yesterday, can you think of an example where you had to do that? Can you put your hand up if you can think of an example?
Dealing with council.
Dealing with council, fantastic. Okay, hands right up, please. Okay, keep your hands up if you got the thing you needed from them. Whew. Wow, I did not expect that. Are you sure? Did nobody get anything done from someone? Did they not? Surely someone did. Anyone? Fantastic, thank you. Right there in the back. Okay, how did you motivate them to do it? Nagging. Great technique. Okay. Any other ideas about how we can influence each other when we're not contractually engaged to do so?
I try and give them something that's in their own best interest to do.
Put yourself in their shoes, right? That's nice, I like that. That's really good. Thank you. So in terms of the design team, this is something we're dealing with all the time. We're having to pull and push with each other all the time to enable us to do our best work. So we've got to trust each other. And if you think about documentation with BIM, we literally show each other's work on our own drawings, right? So if they're not doing a good job, our drawings are going to look terrible. So there's a few key things that I've listed there that I just want to unpack a little bit in terms of the design team. So the first one is professionalism. So most consultants belong to a professional body, and it requires them to behave in an ethical manner. So if I use architects as an example, there's a legal requirement for us to be honest, to be objective, to be unbiased, and even report on risk. And this obligation is written into law, so we are required to act in that manner. If there are parties in the design team that are not bound to similar obligations, then it means that decisions for the project are not all being made at that level. There will be some decisions that are not made sort of with the project's best interests in mind. And that is the weakest link then. So continuing with that analogy, we rely on professionals, but the design team as a whole is only as professional as the least professional part within that group. And that can be suppliers, it can be anyone that's providing design advice for the project. The next part of that is the scope to do the work. So no matter how good your team is, if they're not engaged to do the work that's required for the project, it will not turn out well. So the documentation will hit site and there'll be big gaps in it. And those gaps won't be coordinated because they don't exist in terms of documentation. So we cannot coordinate a design package that doesn't exist. So whether it's seismic design, mechanical plant, or a crash rail, if it's not there, we can't coordinate it. And it won't turn out well. And for the designers, that's not very motivating. There'll be an air of frustration. It may have been building up for months or even years if there's that scope gap within the design process. And that in turn affects quality, cost, and potentially even program, as I'm sure you'll be aware. Design delivery methodology alignment. So I don't mean construction methodology. I'm talking specifically around design, the process the design team follows to establish a coordinated set of documentation. For example, if one party works towards a milestone issue, so like a single drop, that's my job done, right, let's move on. And another party is expecting iterative design, so there's a lot of back and forth to find out further information about what's required for the project. That's going to be extremely painful. And again, the quality of the design collectively will only be as good as the weakest link within that. And the same is true with BIM. So if one party within the project team is modelling to a certain level of detail and another party is modelling to a rougher level of detail, again, the quality of the documentation will be the weakest link within that. So by now I'm hoping that you're sort of getting a sense of why, there might be several reasons why documentation gets to site and perhaps it's a little bit deficient, or there's a couple of gaps in it, or there's a few issues and it's unclear. You're just getting this set cold and you're having to tender off in it and there's no context or background. And I'm hoping that you're starting to see as well the role that design management can play with all of that. So to ensure that the design team is engaged at a comparable level of professionalism, apples with apples, just like when you go out to tender, you sort of want equivalent levels to tender with. Making sure the scope is comprehensive. So Jamie's going to touch on that quite a bit because it is a really critical part in terms of delivering a comprehensive set. Making sure that the design delivery methodology is consistent. And we will be touching a little bit on that in quite a bit of detail, a part of that, which is perhaps something that might be unusual for design management later on. And then, the BIM alignment piece as well. I'd say that any project that's involving a design manager probably is involving BIM as well, so it might just go to follow. So, for example, there's a BIM execution plan that's established at the start of the design process.
So are you going to cover how project manager and design manager scope? Because a lot of what you're talking about sounds a bit like...
Yeah, that's a valid point. Yep, definitely. Yeah, so I'll go into sort of a summary in terms of those roles, and then it'll be really great to get some feedback in terms of how others are experiencing it as well. So here's a project example. So this one's on site at the moment. It's an aged care project. And in this case, there is named roles. So there is a project manager, lead consultant, design manager. There's even an ECI manager. So it's beautifully spread out. It's not a huge project, and yet very well set up. So in my experience of a project, that was pretty indulgent, really, because the client knew better. They'd experienced when it didn't work out so well. And so from there, that's how they roll, and it's fantastic because everyone knows their roles, they know who's doing what, there's clarity, and basically there's no excuses for doing a terrible job. I guess it's worth acknowledging there's an upfront cost to that, and that perhaps is where clients are coming from in terms of maybe not being as comprehensive, is that you do need to pay consultant fees for those early phases, and can you justify it? But those fees are insignificant compared with the cost of an uncoordinated set getting to site. Effectively, what a client is doing is just passing that risk on to the contractor, right? If they, get to site with a set of documents that are incomplete or uncoordinated. So here's a completely loaded question for you to consider, which I think is what you're touching on, Graham. Is a lead consultant that different from a project manager or a design manager? What do you think? What's the difference? Yes. Who was that? Tell me more.
A lead consultant is responsible for coordination of information, not management of the team.
I like how you're differentiating between stuff and people. I like that. I'm going to touch on that in a bit. Any other comments? I guess it was loaded because there is a lack of clarity. So if I use architect's role as an example, they tend to be the lead consultant. Sometimes they're the project manager, sometimes they're the design manager. So in terms of our experience of roles and titles, there isn't consistency across projects. And so it is really important, as Jamie will touch on again, that there's that clarification early on so that everybody understands responsibilities in particular, even if it's perhaps not role or title dependent. And I think that's...
So what do you think best practices?
Best practice for me, it depends on the project size and complexity in terms of whether it needs to be sort of 3 individual people or even more. But I would say that it's really important up front to be clear about what the expectation is of each individual, and equally that if there are any gaps in terms of that requirement, that they're addressed early. And that it's clear all the way through the project so that when you get to site, you know what has and hasn't been done as the contractor, so you know what you're facing in terms of a set of documentation.
Would you also agree that that's highly variable on the basis of the type of contract that you're looking at? It's line of construct or build only?
Yep, that's valid. Yep. Yeah, so I mean, again, another indulgence from my perspective as a designer is ECI. I love it because you have that access and you have the ability to actually influence how it's going to be built and through the design process, which is the ideal, but not always possible. So what for me is consistent, and I think you just touched on it briefly with the people piece, is that the notion of leadership starts to come into things a little bit, because we are having to influence. We can't necessarily have contracts in terms of enabling some of these things to occur. And to be able to influence change, we need strong leadership. So that is a skill. It's not role dependent, and it can come from anyone, but ideally, to a point, it comes from everyone in the project team. And I do want to explore some of those qualities because I think they're relevant no matter what the project structure is and no matter what your role is. And it can make a big difference on the project and for you, because we're only as good as our weakest link. So it's in everybody's best interest. But here we go. This one's for you, Graham. So this is my take on it. So in terms of how sort of we see it, I guess, a lead consultant is responsible for ensuring the design team carries the design intent through to completion. So that means that every consultant in the design team works together to meet the brief from the project, from the early phase to figuring out in the later phases in terms of how it's going to be put together. A project manager is responsible for the governance of the project, so monitoring and reporting on risk, and they're often also the client representative or engineer to the contract. It was interesting, I learnt the other day on a project we're working on, the project manager's role up until construction is actually really light, and then their role gets really serious when they're engineer to the contract, because that's when they start doing their jobs. And I was like, that's bizarre, because if they're not, because they also put their hand up to do design management, interestingly. So if they're not heavily invested in the design process as well, it's going to kick them later, right? You know, because it's going to make their jobs much harder in terms of being engineer to the contract. A design manager is a management function and tool to manage the design process and flow of design information, and therefore the design team itself. So it's often assumed to be covered by the lead consultant. Sorry?
This doesn't consider the ECI at all, correct?
No, it doesn't. No. So tell me more in terms of your thoughts on ECI.
I'm just thinking where you've got ECI engagement and you've got design managers. Sometimes a design manager would be the ECI component of a design project. So the design manager could be the ECI component as well, because this looks like a more build-only process up to the point where the design has been coordinated, managed, handed over to the project team, because it doesn't consider the ECI.
So with this project, the ECI was very specific around the trade team. So they were actually going out to market. They were testing lead times. They were getting feedback in terms of constructability. But the design manager was actually managing the design team.
And who would you, looking at that organigram, who would you expect to set the stakeholder responsibilities, i.e., so sometimes it's cost, it's quality, it's time, budget, list goes on. Where would that sit? Do you expect that to be with the project manager in this space? Because as we know, sometimes the biggest challenge is architects, and we love them a lot, but they creative as they are.
I love how the first dig wasn't it as an architect. I'm loving this. This is great. Oh, sweet. Okay. Oh, yeah, no, fair enough. Okay, first dig. It's all right, Dan. You're not alone. Okay, so in this example, the design manager and the ECI manager actually sat down and wrote the design management plan together and then got client sign off. And what doesn't help, I suppose, is that these are all internal. So it did get a bit awkward because they're effectively the client for this team here and this team here. But still, it was a collaboration. So it was actually acknowledging that there's components that the design manager in terms of pre-contract letting and the ECI manager in terms of post-contract would be able to add value in terms of establishing that plan.
But you're diminishing your ability to value engineer, and I hate using that word, but kind of your value engineering opportunities lost there.
In terms of the ECI?
Fair thing to remember on this one is they're all different types of contract. You can have an ECI contract, which I'll give you an example. When I do my speech where we're involved in design management and preliminary design all the way through, where you can be an ECI contractor that you just brought in that's developed or detailed design, and you're not responsible for any design management. You're there for building input and construction matters only, not responsible for the designers. And then you've got, as you said, traditional job is design and your tender and your build.
Yeah, and in this case, there was still a tendering process. So there was an ECI role, but it wasn't design build. Yeah. So the ECI wasn't sort of taking full risk responsibility of the overall construction cost.
Half the time we see that the client should scope that incorrectly because they expect, well, you ECI and you're there to manage their budget on their behalf, and once you're successful in a project that's going to be all built for a lump sum X, and that's expectation.
Sure.
It's not necessarily structured.
Yeah, so, and I guess that's a valid point. So in this case, again, there was effectively like a memorandum of understanding about the ECI's role up until that contract line in the sand in terms of the fixed price lump sum. So it wasn't expected at the start that they would take liability or risk in terms of the cost. But it sounds like from your experience with ECI, it happens very early. Yeah. I think that in terms of quality, it's ideal if that can only happen at, say, developed design at its earliest, because it enables enough clarity around what the product needs to be to then enable the contractor to manage that risk, and equally that the client knows what they're signing up to any earlier. And I think it gets really difficult unless you're sort of dealing with something where quality is less of a primary factor.
And sorry, the other form of contract is the, which Dan's more familiar with, is the design and build, where the contractors, ultimately providing the design and the construction projects.
Any comments, Dan?
Well, look, I think there are many types of ECIs, and over the last 10 years, ECI has been more shit outcomes than good outcomes for clients. And, a lot of builders, putting a tender forward to negotiate an ECI or something like that, then getting busy with actual jobs and chucking the B team on the ECI and letting it sort of catch fire in the background. I think builders actually have to look at ourselves and make changes around that. Because when a client invests in you in an ECI, there's a level zero. So ECI is a contentious thing right away. If we go to the next slide, I think these three roles in a big picture are kind of like the functional minimum you need for a job. Now the design management piece might be transient. It happens in our business. We're doing ECIs on design construct jobs at concept design, as I usually point, and we're also doing it at end development. And interestingly, a design manager that's project-based for us would absolutely fumble and get lost in concept design and here. Because it's too broad. It's in the grey zone, right?
And he wants to be granular.
Yeah, and they're better at end of developed design, taking through conceits and through detailed design. So I think you kind of need to look at the design management role as it might be, it could be two people, it could be different stages in the histogram of overlap, because they're quite different skills. Early stage, big picture leadership, broad leadership. Anyway, I don't know if that makes sense.
So one question I've got, where does the cost planner sit in that? Because, in my experience, they are the vital ingredient in all of that.
Yeah. So, okay, I'm going to talk about my ideal world just for a second.
Unless Jamie's doing the design management,
Yeah.
fine.
So if we go back to the certainty of the design piece, from a cost planning perspective, that's where you really need somebody that's experienced with the pre-contract letting cost estimating, because they're going to have to make up for all the stuff that you can't see on the drawings, because that's still to be resolved, but absolutely fundamentally part of the project team in terms of the cost management, cost reporting, cost monitoring, and you know, the minimum is that it's by phase, so that you get that estimate updated and it de-risks the rest of the project design program. But in an ideal world, that they're part of the project team and are providing advice as you go. A bit like an effective ECI, where you're actually getting input live during the design development process. So they're actually able to assist in terms of de-risking those cost escalation issues. Any other questions or comments or thoughts in terms of these roles? I just wanted to make a comment just specifically around the design manager. So they're managing the design process and they're managing the design team, and it's often assumed that that's covered by the lead consultant. But I think that's quite short-sighted, because lead consultants aren't always equipped with the skills. They're not necessarily trained or experienced in design management. They tend to be focused more on the design, you know.
So unobjective, they can't manage themselves.
But
They can't manage themselves, you know, they're the lead designer, so, you know what I mean? It's like they can't be objective about their own design.
oh, I see what you mean. Yes, I thought you were taking a dig, but I get it. Yeah, no, you're right. It's hard to. That's right. You know, it's in terms of being a separate party. I mean, I think it's possible in terms of being a professional that you can sort of be objective. But I understand what you're saying. You're pretty invested in the design. You're working overtime to make it work. You're wanting it to succeed. You've got really strong ideas. To then step back and say, all right, how are we going to manage this together and make sure that we're going to get the best outcome for the project, as opposed to one particular consultant and what their sort of drivers are. So I think that's a valid point.
Sorry, just another question. If you look at this process is in the perfect world, like once the project starts, the design is fully coordinated, input on site from the architectural design team is very limited. So the question that actually Simon is kind of thinking about is, with the design manager, on a build-only contract, your design manager would be a separate function. Would it be the contractor? It would be an individual, maybe an engineer, somebody.
Yeah, and it's a lot to wrap your head around, because that is my perspective. Like that's why Graham asked me to join this session, because it's actually coming at it from, before you actually get to site, and being involved separately to the build contract.
Thoughts? That line in the sand, because we know so much DFB that the line gets so blurred in terms of where that responsibility starts and stops, that when you pick up a set of build-only documents and look at it and go like, holy shit, how did we get this far? It's so bad. Just uncoordinated set of documents. You can see there is no design manager involved who's taking responsibility to make sure that it is actually getting coordinated. And I suppose, is that coordination the design manager's responsibility, or is it actually the lead consultant's responsibility?
Sure, okay,
Which is what I guess we're trying, this training facility here, and what the industry needs to go for is in a traditional build phase where the consultants are left to their own devices, that they need to have a design manager as part of that team that may be from the lead architect role, but it has to be an individual role. They're not the designer, they are the design manager that has the ability to spend. It's not a part-time role, it's a 100% role for the whole design phase. So it does need the industry to bring in, and clients to pay additional fees, that it is properly design managed in that consultant role, to avoid the issues that we have now with the build phase.
So do you have design managers on your contract on your jobs?
Yes.
Same.
And that's where Jennifer will go. Jennifer in a couple of weeks will go through all the issues we have where the consultants haven't, just with respect to Shara, the consultant.
I know why I'm there.
But I think Shara agrees with me as also is that the design team needs to incorporate a design manager, and that doesn't necessarily have to come from the builder. It could be a design manager, but it can't. Any project managers in the room?
But
it's not a project management role unless they've got expertise in design management. Again, it's 100% role to be an experienced design manager and to make sure that the job's fully coordinated. Because they need to put the drawings in front of them, they need to review the drawings, they need to understand what's on the drawings. It's not a matter of expecting the architect to say, I've given you a set of coordinated drawings or services, I've given you a set of coordinated, and believe them. You've actually got to understand whether it's true what you've been told or not.
Dennis, just to correct you, you saying the design manager takes ownership of that coordination?
I think we should move on because I think a lot of the answers to your questions will come out of the next wee while. So,
But I would, some of the questions you're asking though, I think are reinforcing that that very limited observation I was making, that the motivation is coming from the construction side in terms of the design management role. Like it seems to be a theme, right? Like everyone's seeing it. It's contractors are motivated to provide it. Yeah, yeah, and the reason is because you're having to pay the price of design management not occurring during the design process, right?
Well, it's that, and the other thing is, sorry Graham, but the other thing is that so much design is completed in that shop drawing phase.
Yeah, yeah, which is what Jennifer's going to talk about a wee bit, so we can go into that.
I think if we go back to the curve, the reason it's becoming a hot topic is because that dotted line has actually moved 2 columns to the left.
So you should have more influence over the design, development and documentation, is that right, as a contractor? Yeah, I mean,
and
maybe that's part of it.
experience, you know, I mean, that's what's being experienced.
Yeah, I'd say from Australia's perspective, potentially, like in terms
Well,
of...
we're doing that. We've got jobs that we're doing development design on, and we've got advanced detailed design foundation pack to do a basement. And yeah, it's right now.
Yeah.
Okay, I mean, look, there's a lot in terms of how the contracts are set up between the contractor and the client, but the piece that I think I want to keep coming back to though is that the one element that has most potential in terms of design management is how we can actually influence people. And that's where the leadership piece comes in. So it's all about people. So the project manager is arguably about risk and auditing. The lead consultant is about the design itself, but the design management is about leading people. Okay, and this might be lost on many of you if you're coming from the construction side. You've got this like super kind of unresolved design that you need to just sort out. But if you think about a full design process and being involved in that as a design manager, that's the opportunity. So a good design manager inspires the design team to do their best work for the project. And they're only going to be able to do it if they're inspired because you have no contractual relationship with them at all. So I'm just going to touch on a few of these qualities. So bear with me because I think this stuff, you underestimate the value you can get from it. Like no one put their hand up to say that they managed to achieve, except what was pestering, I think was the one idea that we had in the room around how to actually motivate people. But the best design outcomes and best quality builds come from having design management thinking. Okay, so high trust. So fostering strong relationships between designers so that they can trust each other to do a good job. So when people are feeling valued and respected, you get the best from them. And we can do this by asking the dumb questions. This is literally the wisest thing I've ever done, is to be the stupidest person in the room, because it enables people to actually speak up and share their ideas. And I think when you think about a project, it's to serve a whole range of people, right? So you need a whole range of people participating in the design process. Because if you don't, you're missing out. So I'm not just talking about the most experienced people in the room or the most knowledgeable people in the room, it's everybody in that design team. If as a design manager you're getting to the end of a meeting or whatever, not everybody has contributed, then you've missed out. The other part to high trust is being genuinely curious. So this again helps the team feel valued and heard, and it encourages that culture that enables participation. Vision. So this bit is critical. The design manager really needs to understand what the end goal is for the project, and they need to take it on just as much as the lead consultant does, because they have such a high level of influence over the designers in terms of getting things done. So I remember earlier on in my career being on site and hearing a carpenter explain to their colleague that the reason why the toilet was in front of the door, like you could see it when you walked down the hallway, it was a dementia care project, and you need to be able to see the toilet because you need visual cues, because you actually don't remember what's around the corner. And for me, that was a sign that the vision for the project had managed to track its way through the entire project, because they were explaining it to each other on site. It wasn't about me sort of having to sit down and explain it. So when everybody is aligned in that common purpose, then the project success goes up a few notches. Capability, so Jamie will talk about this quite a bit, but you need the right people with the right skills involved at the right time, or else it's going to get frustrating. So we do this through our scoping processes in terms of setting up the design team, and that's assessment of not just companies, but actually the individuals that are going to be involved in the project. And by programming, so the design program to enable the right people at the right time. And then giving effect to the tools. So that's all about making sure the information flows are aiding people to do their best work, which in turn enables front-footing any potential issues, etc. So again, just to clarify, I'm talking through a design delivery process and the design management role within that. Another question Graham asked me to answer was, what really frustrates designers when it comes to design management? And so this is another popular diagram, but I thought it sort of explains some of the issues that we face quite well. So a clear brief at the right time. So when the brief is vague and it doesn't get resolved, and the program doesn't allow for that brief to be explored, then it completely kills the project, because you're having to revisit and revisit until you get to site and there's still questions around what the brief actually is. Scope coverage, which we've talked about. This can easily be described as, or disguised as incompetence. Like, you might get a set of drawings and you think they're terrible, but no designer gets out of bed in the morning to do a terrible job. And even if they appear really lazy and incompetent, it will be because of scope or something else, because they've all been trained, they all want to do well for the project. They can only provide what they've been engaged to do. A reasonable program, so that's a big tension that I can hear in the room in terms of whether that's a possibility or not. If there isn't time to work through a full design process, there won't be a full design at the end of it. Strong program management leadership. So this is around managing change as well, because every time something changes, it's going to impact quality. And good cost estimating, input and guidance. So this is about really de-risking blowouts and associated redesign, and there can be quite a lot in terms of planning to assist with that, to try and de-risk it through the design process. So that one is really hard because, so at Ignite, for example, we do focus quite a lot on the commercial realities. We're constantly thinking about ways to do things in a more cost-effective way. And that's really because nothing kicks you in the guts more when you're in up to page 250 of detailed design drawings and then having to value engineer. Like, it just destroys a project. It literally does. It would be much better to actually start again, start the model again, start the drawings again. But the program would never accommodate that and the client would never pay for that. And so you're on the back foot as a designer for the rest of the project. It gets to site and you're just constantly trying to catch up until the end of the project. It's awful. So yeah, that's the designer's perspective in terms of what frustrates us. Moving on to some tools. I mentioned before design management leadership is about giving effect to tools. They're only useful if they actually come out of the drawer and people are inspired to use them. So when I say tools, what sort of things would you consider to be design management tools? Ladder? Program? Yep, what kind of program?
Design program.
Yeah, yep. One over here?
Scope and expectations.
Yep. So a tool, what would that look like in terms of a tool? Would it be a document or a...
Brief.
Brief, very good. Yes.
Elaborate design reviews.
Design review processes, yep, cool. Okay, so I'm going to be vague here. A tool is anything that helps you successfully manage the design team or the design process. Okay, so there is a plethora of potential tools you could be using. It's very much about what you need for the project. So Ignite is building up a library of tools, and really for us it's about managing the design process. We're not we don't offer a design management service as such. It's more about making sure that the designs and the design process is managed. But again, they're only useful if they come out of the drawer. So I'll talk you through a couple of examples. They're, picked at random. Scope gap checklist, that one there. So it's just a high-level prompt for us at the start of the project when we get involved to make sure that the right people are on the project team, so that we can actually say to the client, look, you kind of need to be thinking about this because here's the consequence if you don't. So if you put yourself in the client's shoes, they're setting up a project, they're thinking about who they need to engage to do the design. What sort of reasons do you think they might miss a particular scope or a particular consultant, what sort of reasons would they have not to quite get it right? Yeah. Cost? That's a good one. Yep, so like, I don't want to pay for that, it's too expensive. I have to pay $2,000 for that design, I'd rather not.
Actually genuinely unknown as well.
Yep, yeah, that's valid. A different way of phrasing ignorance, is that? Yeah. So they may not know what to include, and that could be because they're being advised by an inexperienced project manager, or they are inexperienced themselves, or it could be quite an unusual typology that they haven't actually been involved with before. It can also be that the consultant that they've approached doesn't actually offer that scope, and it's not really explicit. So the client may make an assumption that it's included, and the consultant may make an assumption that it's not required. So an example might be seismic design. So the client might assume that the structural engineer will cover that because it's to do with structures, but they tend not to. Or has no items. It might just be an area that they assume that the consultant will know about. The brief for the project might not be defined, so that's valid. So often master planning and concept design is all about actually establishing what that brief is. So what do you need from the hydraulic engineer? You just don't know at that point in the project. Even at the end of preliminary design, particularly for the services consultants, they're often still in that phase of actually writing a design features report where they're establishing what the options are for the project. It could also be that the expertise could be covered by more than one consultant, and there's an assumption about who's doing that. That one gets us a lot. So H1 calculations, mechanical engineer or architect, rainwater calculations. You can see there's a theme from an architectural perspective, but I'll keep going. 3604 level structure, strip drain connections, joinery design, surveying the existing building. All of these things get us. There's an assumption made, and it's not covered. And you get to the end of detailed design and you're ready to lodge for building consent, and you don't have that information and no one's done it. The next one that's shown there as an example was coordination checklists. And these are amazing, I love these because it's all my dumb questions in one list, so I don't even have to think about it. But it prompts me on every project to make sure that the consultant team is delivering to the level that we expect from them to be successful. And we would largely use these ones at Develop Design. The first design advice, or CAN, or Consultant's Advice Notice. So this is where we can actually communicate to the contractor potentially for the first time as a design team. So it's about how we want to work together to get the next phase of that project completed. And it can include things like who and how to contact people, the process to follow for substitutions. So ideally that's all covered in the specification, but it can be quite general or difficult to follow. So substitutions from a designer's perspective is a big one, because the minute you're changing something, then you're designing again. And there will always be knock-on effects that haven't been considered because you don't have the normal design process to go through for that. Our role. So this is something that, again, the contractor make assumptions about what the designer's role is on site, and it may be incorrect. So that's an opportunity to say, we're engaged to provide this level of observation. This is when we expect to be on site, etc. It can get really uncomfortable if a contractor isn't aware and we miss critical hold points. So it's really helpful to have that communication early. Our understanding of the contractor's quality management processes. So again, knowing this at the start saves headaches later when it comes to defects, inspections, and closing out site observation reports. And requirements for completion. So again, you might have, in a larger job, or if there's sort of several building consents or separable portions, then you could have trades that are sort of leaving years before the actual practical completion, and that we might be asking for a training manual or something that we're only going to be training the end users in several years later. So knowing that at the start is really good too. So those are just some examples from a designer's perspective, but they are effectively design management tools. I had a crack at trying to come up with a snappy way to sort of prompt what kind of tools could be included. So checklists, communication, coordination, compliance, and completeness, the 5 Cs. Checklists, I've touched on a couple before, but buildings are complicated. I think I heard somewhere that the average project, you make about 100,000 decisions over the design process of a building. So that's a lot of information to hold in your head. And equally code changes are occurring such that you can never really keep up. So no matter how experienced or knowledgeable you are, checklists are always incredibly helpful. And it can include things like scope checks, quality checks, CRC guidelines checks, communication. So that one might seem obvious, but when you think about the design management process, there's also nuances around what kind of tools we can employ. So some more examples from Ignite, there's the design issues register. So it's about keeping information current in terms of what needs to be resolved as you work your way through a design process. The BIM brief and the BIM execution plan, really, really important to get that up early. PNG sections of a specification could be another communication tool as well. Coordination, so talked about that before, design checks, but also clash detection. So working through the BIM environment. Compliance, so the legal obligations that need to be met with a design, I think. I'm not sure if you'll be talking about that a little bit more, Dan. And equally evidence required checks as well, so that can de-risk issues with consenting. And also when you finish the project. And then completeness, so design programs. So we'll go into a little bit of design programs with our little workshop, but it really is a fundamental tool from a design management perspective. And this is really how we can set out as design managers what we expect when from the design team. And I would say that's regardless of the contract that's set up, that's fundamental. And it can also manage expectations around design change. So if you're sort of into detailed design and the client's like, oh, I could really do with another room or another building, whatever, or I want to move the building over 500 mils or whatnot, you can actually talk them through quite physically with a visual representation of a program about what that actually means.
So some of those checklists look pretty useful, but hard to see them up there. Do you mind if we circulate those around afterwards?
Yeah, so I've got in the packs that are on your tables, I've just got the coordination checklist, just because that was the area that we wanted to focus on, but I haven't included much else, so there is more. There's a lot more, right?
Should we get a copy of the slides at the end of this? Because obviously they're quite small on here.
Yeah, no, we're going to try and sort that out for next week. They're pretty horrible, what got delivered there. So the next sessions will be much bigger, and we'll try and sort out some bigger slides for the future too.
I'm just going to do a time check. I'm just firstly really pleased that everyone's engaged, so thank you so much for doing that so far. It does mean that we're sort of running a bit tight for time, so we will probably keep the group exercise a little bit short and snappy, but we can obviously, you're welcome to follow up with questions, etc. after. Another area that I thought worth touching on from a designer's perspective is the coordination piece, and I think in particular because that is typically considered something that's the responsibility of the lead consultant. But for me, how good coordination is a litmus test of how good design management is as well. And I think if you aren't considering coordination as a design manager, you aren't going to succeed because it's such a critical part of the design process. And in particular, how coordination relates to BIM, I just want to touch on that as well because again, it's an area that we need to accept as part of all the projects that we're involved with. So there are a couple of definitions that I really, really love. The harmonious functioning of parts for effective results. That's a definition of coordination. And in our case, obviously that's about a project, but it's also the definition of design management. You just need to replace parts with people. If you can get your designers coordinating harmoniously, you're going to get effective results. So why does coordination exist in a design process? Bulkheads. Really good summary, thank you. Who likes bulkheads? Sorry, multidisciplinary? Yeah. So, I mean, unless you're building a house to NZS 3604, you're going to be dealing with more than one consultant type, and so you're going to have to get them to work together. I'm going to go on and just talk a little bit more detail about why coordination is important. It's to make sure we're only using the space we need on a project. So QS is in the room. What's like a reasonable number of dollars for 1 square metre of build? Is it like 5,000? Is that the minimum these days?
Depends what you're doing.
Yeah. So that's, I mean, if we say sort of, I don't know, 3,000 to 10,000 then, that's still a lot of money. You'd be incompetent if you're using that space when you don't need to as a designer. That money could go towards, X, Y, Z. So if we don't coordinate our designs, we will definitely be needing that space because you If you're not working together, then you need more space to get the job done in terms of the design. It's to make sure we're sizing our service demands correctly as well. So this room would be really uncomfortable if it was uncoordinated. It could be too hot, or I mean, I know that probably HVAC's a bad example operationally, but we need to make sure that we've provided the right information at the right time to enable the services team to do their work. It's to make sure the building will be safe, so the correct fire penetrations, the structural stability. The structural engineer relies on the team to tell them about weights of all the different elements that are being designed. Fall protection. It's to make sure it's comfortable and easy to use and appropriate for users as well. Again, when you're dealing with multidisciplinary, everyone needs to be working together on that. And most importantly for this room, to make sure it can actually be built. That's coordination as well. So what's involved in a coordination process? Any examples of a coordination process?
Crash detection.
Yeah, that's a tool, yes, yep.
Having all the parts coming together at the right time relative to one another.
Yes, that's nice, I like that. I'm going to write the one down. Can someone write that? Great, thank you. Okay, good. So in a nutshell, the goal for the design management function and coordination is that each member, this is my challenge to you, each member of the design team understands each other's designs as much as they understand their own. What do you think? Would that be reasonable? Yeah? Yeah? Because when they do, that's when they know exactly what will and won't work with their design. So that's where the BIM environment can really help us, because it is so much easier to digest and to review and to understand and to thrash out than a range of PDFs. Like I might have sort of 10 different consultants on my team and I'm sort of looking at all these drawings going, how do they relate to each other? Whereas I can cut a section through and just understand quite quickly what the issues are and thrash it out. But at the end of the day, it's still just a tool, and the design team still needs to work together effectively and at the same level and the same scope for it to be effective. And as a side note, that's also why refurbishments are so hard, because you can't just cut a virtual slice through that building, So I think refurbishments for me would be the exception where you really do have to design on site. There's no way around it, because you're always going to discover things and always going to have to figure it out as you go. So what does BIM stand for? Yeah, that's right. So I'll just again do definitions. The BIM handbook defines it as the sharing of structured information, a coordinated set of processes supported by technology that add value through the sharing of structured information for buildings and infrastructure assets. But the note at the end of the brief definition is my favourite. So BIM is not a single act or process, nor is it a 3D model in isolation or computer-based fabrication. BIM is being aware of the information needs of others as you go about your work. And again, for me, in terms of design management, that's gold, because that's what we need to be doing all the time, is managing the design team, is enabling them to understand each other's work. So, and just for context, the other thing that BIM does, because it's this word that just sort of means all sorts of things to all sorts of people, but it, in terms of being a 3D model, it can be an effective communication tool. It's an information management tool, so in terms of schedules. It's an analysis tool, so you can do takeoffs and simulations. And it can also inform construction sequencing, assist with prefabrication, and inform asset management plans, which might be perhaps what you're more familiar with. But in terms of design management, in terms of design process, it's around that coordination. So this is a slide through a building, and that kind of gives you an idea in terms of what's going on in terms of this design. So if we think about a traditional design program, pre-design is around mobilisation and concept design, why it is, prelim design, where it is, develop design, what it is, and detailed design, how it's built. When would we benefit most from putting effort into coordinating the design? Detailed design? Any other takers? I love it. That's cool. Okay, so definitely all the time. So if you're able to convince your client to get the design team all engaged at the start, that's great, because you can start to get that coordination going as early as possible. But when I mentioned before around the services team, they're still doing their design features reports and optioneering at preliminary design, it can be a bit early to actually dig deep into the coordination process. So the biggest I guess, window that we have to do really effective coordination is actually develop design. When we're at detail design, in an ideal world, if you've really nailed it as a design manager, everyone's at their desks drawing details. Like, they don't even have to talk to each other, because you've nailed it all. You've got all this figured out. Everyone knows where everything is and how big it is and what it needs to be and how it's going to fit together. I know that's really oversimplifying it, but we really want to use develop design for that, because you do need a lot of time to draw the drawings that are needed to do a job, a good quality job when it comes to detail design. So just for fun, I had a coordination session on Friday, and I thought you guys would really enjoy my beautiful, snips that I took, just trying to figure out. In this case, it's that the floorway scullies, they can be a maximum of 600 below the finished floor level, and yet we've got these giant ground beams because we're building on sand, and that was just never going to work. So that would have been an absolute nightmare if we only kind of figured that one out on site. It would have been a shocker. And that's what I get really buzzy around with coordination, because it's like months of near misses on steroids in a design sense. You're figuring it out, you're solving it before you guys even, as a contractor, would even see it. So it's beautiful. But it doesn't actually have to be pretty to be effective. And that's the key in terms of design management as well. All right, how's everyone doing? We're going to get into a bit of a group exercise now, so thank you for being really patient and listening really well. I appreciate it. So I think everybody should have one stack of 4 papers. If you're on a table that's got more than 4 people, you might need to go and hunt. But if you can just pass around the handouts now, that would be really appreciated. So I mentioned before develop design for coordination. I want to pick on coordination with you with this group exercise, and the reason is because there is a perception that it doesn't require potentially design management, that each consultant should be responsible for coordinating their designs. They sign a form at the end of detailed design to say that they've done it, and then that's job done. But there's a lot more to it that's quite nuanced, and it would be great to spend some time on it. So what I'm hoping that you'll learn about by the end of this exercise, depending on how much time we've got for it, is that there is a high level of influence that design managers can have on the coordination process. And you'll probably be experts at this anyway, because as I've learnt today, you're all from the construction side, so you're coordinating on a daily basis as it is. But just to make some assumptions to start off with in terms of this theoretical exercise, there's been decent time to establish a brief and a concept. There's been early involvement of the design team, so they're all engaged, they're up to speed, they know what they're doing. The client has a role during each aspect of the design, so there's good engagement and understanding in terms of the brief development and equally the cost planning, so there's good sign-off. We're not dealing with redesign. The design team's all signed up to design through BIM as well. There's decent time allowed to coordinate the design. Approval processes have happened. We've met with council, so we understand what the requirements are for consent. And the 8 weeks that you'll see for develop design excludes approvals or QS review, so it's very much just design coordination time. So basically, for this example, the project's been set up really well, and it's really just focusing on coordination. And Dan will be focusing on other aspects of design as well, of program later on, so that'll be where we can deep dive a little bit further in terms of the complexities. So that should be what's on your table. There's a project brief I've printed double-sided, so you'll need to turn over to see the other side, which has the consultants list and scope summary, CIC guidelines for those that perhaps are less familiar with develop design, just to explain what it is and what the output is that you can expect from each consultant. Some coordination checklists to give you some prompts in terms of the sorts of things that we want to see have been achieved by the end of this process. A3 blank program, so this is your chance to actually do your coordination plan. So this is where we're going to map out who needs to do what when by the end of develop design, and some note paper. This was my idea in terms of timing. So the idea was get to know each other a little bit first, because you're going to be working together at your tables, and ideally nominate a group presenter. We may not have time to feed back to the bigger group, but please nominate someone just in case. We might be able to get one beautiful idea from each table. 5 minutes to read and discuss the brief, 10 minutes in terms of design development sequencing, so thinking about the order of what goes when. 5 to 10 minutes coordinating activities over time, so thinking about what sort of activities, the questions are written down as well, are required to enable coordination to occur. And then 5 minutes to regroup. If you're an introverted person, you're welcome to work it on your own, but I just ask that you still talk to each other intermittently to make sure you're learning from each other as well. Any questions?
Scary, man.
Woo, getting right into it, I know. So it's fairly deliberate in terms of the role. Coordination might be a bit unfamiliar to you guys, but I think even if you take away one thing from this little exercise, it'll be worthwhile. So Jamie and I and Jennifer can float. We can move around the room if you've got questions as you go and you've started to unpack things. I will just need to confirm how much time we actually have to work through this. So feel free to get into it, and I'll just announce maybe in 2 to 5 minutes time what the plan is, just so that we know what time we're regrouping. And also after this, we'll be having a break, so you can look forward to that once we've got back together. No questions? Go for it. Assumption about what you can achieve in 8 weeks. So some of the groups were sort of looking to lodge for building consent at the end of that stage. So coming back to the concept of develop design is that by the end of it, you really want to have a really well coordinated, resolved set of general arrangement drawings that also have key details worked through, so that by the end of develop design, you've got really good clarity about what everything is, where it's going, and why. But you won't necessarily have fully resolved how to put it together in terms of the construction. It's more about making sure that all the spaces are all set out, that everything's going to work, that everything fits, so that your plant can all have a nice home and that it can circulate through the building without clashing and creating bulkheads. So by the end of develop design, we want to make sure we're really clear on any requirement for bulkheads. There you go. But in this particular example, I guess some of the nuances that I thought was quite interesting is probably the refrigeration consultant more than anything else. They've got like 1 billion different condensate drains that they need to go through the ground, and it looks like Swiss cheese basically for the structural engineer to deal with. And the location of those drains is so precise. There is no room for movement, but they're going to go up to market to decide who the refrigerant provider is, and so we don't actually know exactly where those drains need to go. So as a design team, we're designing something super precise when we don't have all the information available to us, which is a really good example of design process generally for us in terms of what we're having to deal with, and probably the reason why design managers all come from construction firms. But yeah, so apologies we can't sort of regroup in terms of lessons learned and what we've kind of picked out ourselves. I hope you learned from each other instead, and that you've got some takeaways in terms of coordination through developed design. But just to wrap up, I guess, final slide is really just again to say thank you for participating and for listening and for being attentive. I appreciate that. And just to re-emphasise, we all get out of bed in the morning with the goal of doing a good job each day. And when it comes to a construction project, we rely entirely on each other to enable a good outcome for the project, where it's so interdependent that design management skills are critical to our successful project. And this means design managers, we need to lead and inspire the team to do their best work. When it comes to tools and a defined role, there is a cost. I think we can acknowledge that, if there is to be a design manager on a project that a client might have paid for. But when a project size can't justify it, there's still that leadership piece and the skills and qualities that can be provided. And that's something that anyone within the design team can make an effort to provide. And that's in everybody's best interest, because we're only as strong as our weakest link in terms of a design team. So when we carry that through the project timeline, this investment in communication and collaboration and forming connection with other designers is what improves the project outcome and experience for everybody along the way. And then the final one is around the communication piece. So you can never communicate enough. I read somewhere that you can tell somebody something 10 times and they may only hear it on the 10th time. So you can assume that no matter how much communicating you are doing, you're probably not doing enough. So that's it from me. Thanks again for your involvement and your questions and your comments. Really value that, because there is a lot of knowledge and experience in this room. It's fantastic. The plan now is for us to all break, have a proper loo stop, and then to regroup 1 minute before 5 to enable Jamie to kick off the next session. Thank you.